Hi everyone. In this lecture I'm going to talk about how we will approach the study of art from Africa. To begin with, when we look at the artwork, I want you to do a bit of an investigation, just like an art historian would. So there will be a large collection of images of artworks that will be found on a folder online that you will need to methodically go through and peruse and sort of make sense about. So studying how to look at these images is really what this whole class is all about. So to begin with, when you go to the Dropbox where you'll find the images, you'll see that there'll be kind of small little thumbnails, and each file has a code. This image code is the identification number for that image. The number is random, it doesn't have any meaning, but it's just a way of knowing that that picture refers to that code. And whenever you refer to the picture, you do not need to include the actual picture. All you need to do is cite the code. So once you start to look at these pictures, you'll need to first of all sort of figure out how to sort of describe what you're looking at and know what it is you're seeing. What is it the object made of? Uh, what does it look like? Try and find words that really clearly identify what it is in the picture, the best of your ability. Once you start to get enough descriptive terms, you might recognize the image from your own experience or from the textbook or from the lectures, and in that you will find enough information to start to piece together a kind of general idea of what you're looking at. Once you have that general idea, you can do some more research online, wherever, and you'll find enough to kind of sort of solidify all that you need to know about the picture in general. Once you've collected a number of images and their identities, you start to sort of organize them by culture, by historic period, by certain salient characteristics that they all have. And that organization will allow you ultimately to compare one image with another, because it's not just enough to know what this one picture is. The real key to understanding these art objects is to understand how they relate to each other. Which one came before the other, which one inspired another, which one is in similar ideas or expresses the same kind of uh, feeling. So these are all things that you need to do to understand the artwork. So let's practice this. To begin with, we're just going to open up an image and we're going to try and figure out what we can learn by just looking at it. Not a whole lot. There's always going to necessarily be some level of research to make sense of what you're seeing. The goal here is not to make my own interpretation of what I'm looking at, but to try and understand what this work of art means to the people who made it. So I need to investigate it with a kind of an open mind and be prepared to learn and cite new information as it comes to me. So to begin with, we're looking at a plaque. So there is a kind of base or a flat base that this is a relief, meaning it's sort of raised sculpturally from that flat plane. So a relief is the first sort of good descriptive word. Then I'm looking at the material, and I guess this is made of metal, okay? And we can have that confirmed as a kind of bronze copper alloy, that sort of metallic burnish that you see here. It's a very deep relief. And if I look closely, I can see the figure is almost completely separate from the ground, and that there is this, lots of rich ornamentation and decoration in the figure. The face and the head are a little bit larger than natural, and the body, while stylized, has certain natural features that make it unmistakably a male body, a warrior, perhaps a helmet. We see a stylized sword and staff. And then we notice that there's a kind of hierarchy to the figures. There's this one figure who is central and larger than the others. And there are these two flanking figures with shields, which sort of frame the two figures. And then there's these four smaller figures sort of tucked in between the two flanking figures. So in a sense, we have this whole company of characters all sort of immediately facing toward us. We can also see that in this deep relief, this extraordinary richness of ornamentation and design, such that we can read that there's jewelry and there's decorative patterns that have been applied to the surface, giving it this extraordinary sense of wealth and power. Furthermore, up at the top, we see this one figure seems to be holding something to their mouth, like a horn. And indeed, that's what you see, that sort of spiraling form that they're holding to their mouth, sort of announcing the arrival of this figure, perhaps. Lastly, if you look very closely at the background to the piece, you notice that there's this delicately incised sort of flower leaf pattern that sort of ornamentally decorates the furthest part of this plaque. All right, so that's my descriptive information. Most of what I can guess or look at and try and make sense of. I don't know really what I'm looking at just yet, but I do need to ultimately get to know this much better by finding out the primary descriptive information. Who was the artist? What was it called? What was the date, materials, location? All this information is specific to this one particular piece. So let's just say I start to look. I don't know anything. I Google good old bronze Africa sculpture. Sure enough, I see something that's done in a very similar style, and it is Benin. So it's a Benin bronze. So then I go Benin bronze relief, and I come up with another image that looks really similar. Okay, the deep relief, a large figure with smaller figures, and we call this a hierarchic scale. Anyways, we see all these figures in here. We start to now know this is a Benin bronze relief. So I start to narrow this down. I can figure and see something that's very similar, and I can assume that what I'm seeing is much the same as this, though not exactly identical. So now that I have an idea of what I'm looking at, I need to start to look at things that are from the same genre, the same culture, historic period, things that serve the same function. Similar kinds of work with Benin art, let's say, maybe Benin art that was made of ivory or other bronze works. And I'll start to look at what bronze means in the Benin society. Thusly, once I've sort of amassed enough information about Benin bronzes, I can start to see how these are broadly similar to different kinds of works in West Africa or elsewhere in Africa that might relate to the themes and ideas that are the symbolic visual patterns. Okay, so this is sort of what we're trying to do. We identify the work of art, and then we sort of see things that are immediately similar to it, and then things that are more broadly similar to it. And this allows us to kind of situate the work in a kind of web of connections. Now, the first assignment you're going to get is going to be fairly straightforward. You're going to have a list of terms that I'll give you, and you're going to need to choose 5 of the 20 or so terms on the list and tell me what that term means, and then use that term and apply it to a particular image that you have found in the image collection. So my term is going to be, let's say, Ebe Amen. So the word Ebe Amen is the river leaf pattern, is a design that can be found on the background of the Benin bronze reliefs. It signifies the cosmic life force that the ancestor is emerging from. Okay, so this leaf river pattern This is the design that we identified earlier in the back of the relief. So we want to take our definition, and then I'm going to take the code of that image, and I would say code such and such is an example you can see in the background of this Ebe Amen pattern. Okay, so I can say very specifically that this term directly relates to this image. You do that 5 times and you're finished the assignment. It's fairly straightforward, but it really has to demonstrate that you understand how these words can be used to describe the pictures. Now, the next assignment that comes a week later, it's really important to go a little bit deeper into the images. And to do that, we're going to make an image comparison. So let's just talk generally about making comparisons. So if I were to do an essay about 2 different works of art, let's say one of them is an iceberg and one of them is the Titanic, and I would describe one as a massive piece of ice, greatly varying in shape, which has broken away from a glacier. And then I go on to talk about the Titanic as the greatest ship of her kind, sunk on her maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. So, and I left my paper at that, and people would be like, well, wait a minute, you're missing a very important point. It was the iceberg that sunk that Titanic. So that part of the information, that very collision indeed of those 2 things needs to be stated. You need to talk about how they are related in a very specific way. Comparison cannot be just one thing and then another thing. It really needs to have that key point of real contact where those 2 things overlap. That's where a comparison becomes meaningful and significant. So there are a lot of different kinds of comparisons. One very easy kind of comparison is simply where the image is a part of another image. So I have a temple here, and this is the gateway to that very temple. All right, so that's a very simple kind of comparison. We're just saying this is a detail of some larger thing. You could try to make something a little more challenging and you say, like in the case of the relief sculptures, here's one of those relief sculptures and here's another one, or here's another example of bronze royal art from Benin. Okay, so it's similar in style and character, but in a different object all on its own. So we can start to extrapolate a little bit about what general characteristics these 2 things have. Furthermore, you could talk about historic influences that came before or after these artwork that you're initially talking about. That before this, they did this, or after this, this art became this. This kind of historic kind of connection and comparison is a really valuable thing to be able to do. And this is really, to me, the most important part of making comparisons, is trying to get those historic comparisons. But this is hard. It requires a lot deeper research and clarity in your writing. Lastly, one of the more challenging is to talk about conceptual differences between one thing and another, to really identify how one work of art conceptually shifts ideas from one thing to another. And to do that, you really have to go very deep into the particulars of each of these images. And that's why that one, in my mind, is one of the more difficult kinds of comparisons to make. And one that is, challenging for anyone who's not really fully invested in understanding what the works of art are. So let's give you some very concrete examples. All right, so in making comparisons, our image originally before, and now we found another one that is similar to it. Okay, so we can say, making a comparison, here's one Benin bronze plaque of a warrior, and here's another example of that same idea. We can see how they are similar and different to each other. Then we can talk about inspirational things, the ways in which bronze making in West Africa and that region has evolved over time. I'm going to say that this influenced the development of these bronze plaques. Okay, so we see the process of that evolution, any step along the way. Furthermore, we can look at different kinds of uses of metal in other parts of West Africa where it may have a very different meaning, a very different idea, but still represents this idea of a totem, of an ancestor in an honorific way. And so different stylization, different purposes and ideas. So it's a really important to be able to link it back, even though they are visually very different, they do have some kind of common point of contact. All right, and then lastly, we can look at contemporary art and we say, this is where this art has evolved to. That Benin bronze makers are still working and they are creating new works based on the ideas of their ancestors. So that's my quickie intro to the way we're going to approach this kind of image identification assignment. When you get to the section exam, and there are 3 of them, you're going to be asked to give definitions of terms that I choose. I'll put up 5 terms and you write definitions for 3 of the 5 terms that I choose. Then in the next section, I'm going to have 4 images and you choose any 2 of the 4 images and you write an image identification for each of the images you choose. And then lastly, there is going to be some essay questions. You're going to write about the essay and use the folder images as evidence in your answer. So in each of these 3 parts of the exam, knowing about the folder images is absolutely essential. You need to take good notes. You need to take the time to learn about each of the images and be able to use them effectively in your writing. Okay. Lastly, for this class, we have a research paper for the Electronic Writing Portfolio, or EWP. There are 3 parts to this assignment. Midway through the class, we'll be doing a proposal. I'll give you a list of topics you can choose from, or you may have a topic of your own you want to write about. You'll give me a brief description of what the topic you're going to write about, and then I want to see 25 images related to that subject. So you can show me a bunch of pictures you've found that show me the kinds of things that you're interested in talking about. Very central to this research is that you are showing me visually the importance of this topic. What are you going to write about visually? And so I want to be able to see that in the clarity of your images and the accuracy of the images you have relevant to the topic you want to talk about. The next step is you're going to take those 25 images and you're going to hone them down to a mere 10, and then you're going to put them in order that you want to write about. So you're going to hone your subject down, focus it down on a particular area, and then you're going to show me and explain why you're doing that in this order. And then lastly, there is the EWP essay itself, which is just about 1,900 words to 1,200 words in length. This is your chance to kind of go in and talk about these images and explain how this topic is important. Okay? So, some general advice I have to you: take time to study and read. As an online class, it's very difficult to be prepared every day for what you need to do. And it takes time. Get away the distractions and treat it like you're in an actual classroom. Really sit down without uninterrupted time and really dedicate a couple of hours to it. And then you will find you'll get more out of it. You won't feel so stressed, so anxious. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. Okay? And lastly, really take the time to edit and revise your writing. So many people put together one draft and it's so easy. They want to be done so badly. They just throw it into the inbox and forget about it. It's really important to stop before it's too late and reread your paper. Read it out loud. It really will make a huge difference. You'll catch all kinds of grammatical errors and confusion of logic. All right. And that said, probably the best thing you can do is get someone else to read it, or by all means, go to the writing center and have them review it for you. Taking time and learning about your writing is something that is so important and so valuable for your entire education. This is not an English class. My comments to you will be constructive, but maybe not as specifically helpful as you may need to improve your writing. So it really is up to you to take the initiative to improve how you write. Okay, so that's my introduction to this class. And if you have any questions, be sure to take a look at the syllabus again, or by all means, contact me and I'll be happy to clarify any questions you might have. All right, see you around.